Hello, everybody, and welcome. Oh boy, it is time. Season 8 is upon us, and of course, that means that we are going to have our big preseason patch. We got the patch notes for that last night, so I'm going to take a little bit of this time here in this video to kind of talk about the patch notes, what kind of things we might be able to expect, and I guess a little bit more on what my thoughts about the patch notes in general are. You guys already know how this goes if you guys have watched my previous patch notes rundown. So let's get started here. I'm going to try to do this in one take. We'll see how that goes because clearly I've done my time management correctly and I'm starting recording this a couple of hours before maintenance starts, although I plan to have it up by the maintenance starts instead. Of course, we do have the Battle Pass information all over here on the event page when you start typing in playeternalreturn.com into your search thingy at the top of the that thing. And just a lot more things about the season pack. As you can see here, you do get the Magic Crush Adela skin as soon as you buy that Season 8 pack. And then a couple more information about the season pack in general. But if you guys want more information about all this, make sure you go and type playeternalreturn.com up in the search bar on your browsing source, whatever it is. Other than that, though, let's get straight into the patch notes. 0.74 is what we are on now. It's been quite a while since I've done a big season patch review in general, right, on stream, or I guess this is the first time on video. But let's take a look. We have a lot to cover. Now, TLDR, I did take a look at the patch notes. I just took a quick look at it last night before I went to sleep. There are some things I do like about it, some things I'm very confused about, and big changes in general that I don't know how it is going to be yet. I will give my thoughts about it just looking at it right now, but of course we're not going to be able to decipher everything until we physically play this patch. So make sure you guys remember that, and here we go. So to begin off, of course, with Season 8, we are going to have the preseason beginning here, and that means that the regular season for Season 7 is going to end as soon as the maintenance starts. So I know, of course, by the time this video goes up, most likely the season itself will be over, but hopefully your Season 7, you guys got the rank that you really desired, and hopefully it was fun. Other than that, though, Preseason 8 pack, this is just pretty much standard, right? The Season 8 pack, I said preseason, but I meant to say the Season 8 pack will be on sale in the first couple of weeks that it is available, and then a slightly lesser sale when it is after that time. I'll probably buy it here. I know it's a lot cheaper than the one before for Season 7, but there's a lot less content from the looks of it, which is probably the reason why it is a lot cheaper. And looking at the contents here, of course, you saw a little bit more of it back over on the previous screen that I showed you with the event page, but this is a little bit more of a descriptive style of information on that season pack, so make sure you guys take a look at this if you would really like to. The Adela skin here, again, will be available with the Season 8 pack upon purchase. So I don't know if this is going to be a specific for the Season 8 pack. From the looks of it, it will be. And if you don't buy it through the Season 8 pack, I don't know if they'll make this available or not. As far as I know, the previous ones haven't been, so this might be the only chance to pick up that Adela skin for yourself. And the other skin that will also be releasing is going to be the Winter Breeze Elena. And if you get to take a look at the top of your screen here, well, the top right of your screen, I'll include the video for the Winter Breeze Elena showcase in that little card at the top right, so make sure you guys go check that out. In game, I think it looked really cool. The splash art looks amazing. The graphics, I don't know. I mean, it looks okay. It looks okay. It is only a rare skin, so it's not like something that's going to be too amazing in and of its own right, but a good skin regardless. Absolutely recommend it if you are into Elena or anything along this line of design. A couple more things here, just Aiden related things that will be going on sale as soon as the maintenance ends. And then the big part of Season 8. Battle Zones are going to be here during Season 8, and I honestly thought they were going to be releasing this a little bit later, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. But then again, it is preseason. They do need time to test things out. So I did actually talk a little bit about the Battle Zone before in my Season 8 dev stream video, and it seems like a lot of the information is pretty much in line with it. I'm going to start scrolling down here, and then whatever information either is wrong from the dev stream or just wasn't included in the dev stream, I'll start talking about it a little bit here. But for the most part, I did cover it in that video, so I think we should be fine. But looking at it right now, of course, battle zones appeared twice during the game. I did talk about that as well. Day 2 as well as Day 3. And that means, of course, you're going to be either able to decide between the androids, Alpha or Omega, Alpha spawning in the second day and Omega spawning in the third day, or you're going to have the option to go to the battle zones instead. And a lot of the rule sets that I talked about is going to be right here, although there's a little bit of more information that I could talk about, so let me just go through this one at a time here. Like restricted areas, you will be alerted to the location of the battle zones the previous night, so you can just kind of see it on the map. I did show it in the video there as well, so you can kind of get an imagery of that. I'll include it up on the screen here as well. Once the battle zones start, you can't leave, otherwise you lose in that battlefield and you'll most likely just kind of head pop if you try leaving the zone. And the battle zone ends when one team remains and they're going to be considered the winner. Now, I do remember, if I correctly, there's something interesting about this part right here, the battle zone kit. And I believe this is supposed to be for team modes or something like that. Or even maybe in solos, because I did take a look at this. It's a little bit confusing. When I first looked at it, maybe it'll be a bit less confusing when I actually read it here. But if you do have the battle zone kit, then you will be able to do the battle zone rapid reconstruction, which is essentially saying that you can revive after you die in the battle zone. Now, if you won in the battle zone, then you haven't used it, but it seems that it's going to be removed for the winning team, and that means you can technically, from the looks of it right now, still participate in the next battle zone, but because you don't have the resurrection, if you die in that battle zone, I think that straight up might be game over. I don't know. If I'm going to be honest with you, that's the way that I interpreted it. And if that is the case, then cool. That is one way to prevent somebody from just consistently snowballing with multiple mythic accessories or guaranteed upgrade enhancement transitions just because they are super far ahead and they are almost guaranteed to win in the battle zone. So a good way to kind of balance that. Of course, we talked about the resurrection before as well. Once you die, you will be able to resurrect again after 5 seconds. You can choose the location that you start at, and bada bing, bada boom. Nothing too crazy there. Battle zone marks, we also talked about this as well, each individual zones. Let's take a look at the numbers one more time here. The acceleration battle zone will allow your movement speed to be increased by 20%, CDR by 20% as well. Berserk will give you Omni-Siphon 20% and final damage increased by 20%. And for defense, if you are out of combat from the looks of it, 3 seconds or more is essentially out of combat, you will gain 350 shield for the first battle zone and 500 for the second one, so nothing too surprising there. Same thing for the nerf overflow gauge as well. We did talk about this in that video, so just a quick TLDR. If this gauge reaches the max, then you will unfortunately have pop and die inside of the battle zone. And this timer is unrelated, by the way, to the regular game's time, so you don't need to worry about your regular time just because the nerve overflow gauge is all the way to the max. To lower this gauge, you either have to defeat other players to pick up these little stim packs, or you have to hit this little drone that is moving around in that battle zone and take the supply or the stim packs that they drop here as well to drop your nerve overflow gauge, as you can see right there on your screen. Nothing too surprising so far. Battle zone rewards, we did see this screen here as well, and now that we have a little bit more of a higher graphic resolution version of this, from the looks of it, we also talked about how the more players there are inside of the battle zone, the better your rewards can be. And it seems like that really is the case here. So I guess this number right here will depend on how many people were inside of the battle zone. And you can see the different individual tiers of items as you go. So the Talagring, the dagger, hero's record, etc., etc., etc. Just the better your items are, the better, the more people that you need to defeat inside of that battle zone to make sure you can claim that reward. And you can also see that with the transition items all the way at the bottom of that graphic as well. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here for the items. Hero's record, a little bit different than the records of the hero that I was hoping for, but I guess It is what it is. I do have to take it. Stats on it are pretty similar from what we saw. False Oath is the active that I talked about before. This time around, they changed the numbers to 300 HP, and the pledge form is still pretty much the same. The duration of pledge is going to be 6 seconds. Of course, we also talked about this here as well, and the additional stats that you do gain after that as well. Emote is also another thing that we did talk about. It seems like they pretty much kept a lot of these items the same from the screenshot that we got. If you do want a little bit more of a description, of course, I'll add the link to this patch notes down in the comments below, so make sure you guys check this out. But for the most part, we've already talked about what effects these are going to give. Nothing massive has changed about these whatsoever. I think it's just the numbers or something like that, so nothing too surprising. And for Psyche's Blade, there we go. The official name is going to be this, not whatever I typed in that document. And same thing here, pretty much the same thing that we talked about, except just a little bit more descriptive in what we actually get. Where if you're playing Psyche's Blade and you deal the damage, then you will gain Conviction stacks and the enemies will get Vertigo stacks. Conviction stats just gives you buffs, as you can see right there, that stacks a couple of times. And Vertigo gives the enemies debuffs. That doesn't stack. Good. If enemies got a stacking slow, that would really be bad, but that's okay. It does not stack. It's just the multiple times you hit it, then the more stacks of conviction you get, which of course means that with Psyche's Blade, you want to hit them as many times as possible, even if the slow itself doesn't stack. Clodhog Ring, basically the same thing I said. 12% of the damage taken by your ally. I think that's one of the bigger number changes there. And Arc Reactor, exactly the same thing as we talked about, where you get put into stasis for like a quick moment and then you get to blink forward at a certain amount of distance. Other than that, I think for the mythic items, nothing too crazy there. We've already known what these items will do for the most part, and now we have confirmation as to what they do as well as the numbers. Would not be surprised if some of these get changed. I know they're mythic items, but some of them look really, really good. Like in my opinion, Psyche's Blade is really good at the moment, just looking at it, as well as Hero's Record. This item looks extremely, extremely strong considering the long duration of it, because in Eternal Return, a lot of these fights will end in a couple of seconds. 6 seconds is really, really strong, and the duration of it really lets your character be an absurd amount of a powerhouse that continuously does damage over the course of time thanks to the additional stats that you get. And of course your sustainability is also going to be crazy despite losing 300 max HP. That isn't too problematic, I think, for the most part, as long as you can use it earlier on in the fight. And some other people, if you do see stuff like the Hero's Record on other players, you'll just have to take this into effect, try to force them to pop the False Oath, and then back off and then maybe go back in when it's on cooldown. Now then, a couple of other Battle Zone rules. We talked about the leaving thing already. Other than that, mastery gain in the battle zones are going to be limited. And if only one team is present, of course, then they automatically win. But the amount of rewards that they can get is going to be very low due to the insufficient amount of participants. We did talk about this as well. And as I mentioned earlier, both battle zones are designated simultaneously with the spawn of Alpha and Omega, which means you just need to pick and choose between Alpha and Omega, or are you going to go to the battle zone instead? That is going to be it for the battle zone section. In my opinion, battle zones are going to be really, really nice. Again, as I also mentioned in the dev stream video, I think there's a lot of cogs that are turning in Season 8 in general, right? Although battle zone is going to be the main pitch of the season, there's a lot of other things that kind of coincidentally goes alongside battle zone, that if those things aren't balanced well, then of course battle zones are going to suffer, and if battle zones aren't balanced well to begin with, and I think the game as a whole and the game flow is going to be definitely struggling a lot, especially with how strong some of these mythic items look. This is going to be a really big thing that I'm going to be personally looking out for, especially when it comes to the casual scenes, the competitive scene, or even just ranked games in general. Now then, let's start talking about Season 8 here. Of course, we did see this as well in the dev stream, where we're going to have changes to wild animals. A lot more changes, however, than what we thought. First of all, let's add the fact that amount of credits are going to be added to regular animals as well. We didn't know about that one. They will be reducing the amount that you do get from mutants, however, thanks to the fact that we have a big amount of inflation of credits coming through here. But another thing that we actually didn't get information on is the fact that wild animals are now going to spawn a lot faster. 25 seconds for some of them. From the looks of it right now, it actually seems to be for most of these animals. 20 seconds for, of course, those big ones down here. But another thing as well, we did actually hear about this. I didn't know it was actually going to be a thing until I read it here. Drop rate from wolves for some transitions, Tree of Life and Meteorite. Of course, you can see right here is that they are going to have to be above level 10, which means not going to be the first spawns, because if I remember correctly, the first spawn of wolves have a level cap of 10, even if they automatically level up. So starting from the second set of wolves, they will be able to have a very small chance to drop a Tree of Life as well as a Meteorite. So a lot of animal changes, and I did see some information about Nadine down by the character changes, so we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But a lot more accessibility for credits and things like that in Season 8. Okay, and next up, we are going to talk a little bit about the console and drone adjustments. We did talk about this pretty much as well, at least when it comes to the consoles, reducing the amount of time that you have to wait until the item actually comes out. And of course, in general, just allowing people to make use of these consoles a lot more often than before. And increased prices of the consoles. I don't think this was necessarily covered on the slides of the dev stream, but if I remember correctly, one of my Twitch viewers, my live stream viewers, did mention that I believe the devs talked about this, even though it wasn't on the slides, where they were going to increase the prices on the consoles. And this isn't all too surprising. I mean, you can see right here that the prices are going up to match inflation. Not too surprising about that one. There's a lot more sources of credits coming out in general. So 15 price increases for most of these items. You can just kind of think of it as about like a 20% to a 50% increase for these credits here. You can see Medkit going from 20 to 35, System Shutdown Code increasing by 10, Tree of Life 20, Meteorite 20, Mithril 25, and yada yada yada. Of course, that means that you're just going to, in general, have to be a lot more effective around the map in regards to hunting. And of course, the mutant animal, still very big sources of credits. You're going to have to continuously look for those as you go throughout the game if you want to start calling in some of these really big items as well. With the new credits economy, we're also going to have a change to the remote drone prices. I don't think we got this information, but again, not too surprising because the economy itself is going to be changing here. Credit cost is going to be increasing, but they are going to remove the fact that the cost of calling things in are going to increase per use. Starting credit amount is also going to decrease, but as you can see here, credit cost 15 and 15. So at least when you start the game and you're routing here after a minute passes, if you missed an item or you do need to call it as part of your build, you still will be able to. And the amount of credits that you gain per character elimination is going to go up, starting from solo mode from 3 to 5 here instead. Next up is going to be the food styles. We did hear about this in the dev stream, where 3 different items, actually we heard about 2, but there's going to be a third one that's going to be added here, that gives you permanent stats as long as you drink these items. So instead of giving you recovery and a little bit of a buff that you get at that moment, they're going to be giving you a buff in general that is going to remain permanent as a stacking source. For Holy Water, we're going to have defense increasing permanently when consumed up to a max stack of 3, so a total of 9 defense. Tears of Selene here, of course, a little bit more on the offensive side. Attack power and skill amp stacking up to 3 times here as well, so 9 and 15 respectively. One other thing that we actually did not get is Zen Vitality. They added this into one of the 3 items here as well. That's going to be going up from an epic to a legendary. Of course, if you are wondering how to make Zen Vitality, it is going to be with a Tree of Life as well as a Buddhist scripture, I think, if I remember correctly. Don't know if this is going to stay consistent. It doesn't say anything here. But with Zen Vitality, you will get a max HP stat increase that will be permanent by 30. That stacks up to 3 times as well. So a total of 90 base HP that you're going to be able to get from Zen Vitality if you do eat these as well. And as you can see here, like Holy Water and Tears of Selene, Zen Vitality will now be obtained from Omega and Wickling. So effectively, you're just going to be able to make it. that's what's going to be happening here. Zen Vitality, Tears of Selene, Holy Water. I would not be surprised if they're still craftable, right? Holy Water with the Mithril, Tears of Selene with the Moonstone, as well as the Zen Vitality with the Tree of Life. You'll still be able to get them from these objectives, as it says here, Omega as well as Wiggling, but they're going to be giving us buffs instead of the, well, permanent buffs, more so than recovery, and the momentary buff while that food is ticking. Next up here as well, we're going to be talking about changes to objectives. We actually did hear about this on the dev stream here, where before it used to be 1 meteorite spawning from day to night cycle. Now it's going to be 2 meteorites instead. And the reason why they did this is because during the battle zones, so day 2 as well as day 3, meteorites will not spawn. They specified that they wanted the objective differences to either be the battle zones or the androids. So they're going to try to remove this meteorite part off of the android or the objective decision between the two, and they're going to add it during the night cycles here instead. So 2 meteorites will spawn from the first night through the third night. So that means 2 meteorites on night number 1, 2 meteorites during night number 2, and 2 meteorites during night number 3 as a total of 6. Still the same amount as we have had currently, but they're just going to be changing when they actually show up. Now, as we can see here as well, we actually had one slide, if I remember correctly, during the dev stream where we did have something about these objective location spawns differing here for the androids. If you could take a look at this graphic right here, of course, they're planning on adding these android objectives to every single one of the zones. Now, for the zones that we are already familiar with, for example, like alley, like beach, like hotel, archery range, it is very, very familiar. But then some of the other ones that we haven't noticed before, school, avenue, forest, like chapel, cemetery, etc., 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 they will be getting the androids here as well. Now, of course, okay, fine here, pawn, temple, as well as factory. There you go, if you want to list out the rest of them. This just kind of makes it so that a lot more of the map is going to be important, and you actually have to keep track of where objectives are going to be spawning here. Not exactly sure what this does overall, because I do remember in the dev stream that they wanted to add a little bit more accessibility to the map as well. We'll see how long this goes for. I do think it's a good idea that they added more spawn spots, because some of these spawn spots, in my opinion, were pretty annoying to fight in. But of course, as I said earlier as well, we'll have to see what actually happens when it comes down to these things to begin with. And I talked about this here as well. 2 meteorites, 2 tree of life, of course, 2 battle zone, and then alpha. I talked about this pretty straightforward. But something that we didn't also get is the fact that length of days and nights are also going to be changing. Now, these changes are just to make sure that the battle zones are available as long as possible from the looks of it, because you can see here that night number 1 is going to be decreasing by 10 seconds, but then day 2 will be increasing by 20 seconds here. Night number 2 is going to be decreasing by 20 seconds, and for day number 3, 25 seconds. Actually, no, 35 seconds overall for day number 3. So they're just kind of changing up the days and night cycles to make sure that the battle zones are going to be completely fine when it comes down to it. This kind of helps a lot of other characters since night sessions are very difficult to deal with. Of course, a technical nerf to Daniel if you really want to think about it like that. But shouldn't be too big of a deal when it comes to the physical game flow, I don't think, because I think a lot of the times here pretty much evens out when you try to calculate down the positives and the negatives either way. Next up is going to be the changes to Hyperloop. We talked about this, where you can Hyperloop to your teammates and So nothing too crazy that we have to cover here, but they are going to be changing up a little bit in regards to how the Hyperloop defense works. Now, we did see this in the 0.73 patch notes, where the fix that they added to these Hyperloop things with the CC and vulnerability was just a kind of like a band-aid fix, where they wanted to get an actual fix here instead. And the fix that they decided to go for here is the fact that you can only get crowd controlled once when you're on a Hyperloop from the looks of it right now. And if you get Hyperloop canceled due to a crowd control, then you will get a defense buff for 10 seconds where you can't get canceled because of a hard crowd control for the 10 seconds that you're trying to Hyperloop out. So that means you can get it canceled once, but after that, not anymore for at least that rotation of the Hyperloop. And that should make it so, for example, we've had a lot of cases in Hotel where we have like Hyunus, Yans, a ton of people just consistently stacking crowd control one after another. But at least here, there is a little bit more variety in what they can do, and maybe Bernices are going to be a little bit happy about this here as well. We did talk about this during the dev stream as well. Healing reduction and food. Healing reduction not going to apply to food items anymore, but they are nerfing food down at the bottom. I'll talk about that as well. So at least just a generic thing, food is going to be a little bit nerfed, but healing reduction not going to be affecting it any longer. And improvements to survivor elimination effects. I guess they want to remove love shots a lot more here as well. Going from 0.3 seconds to 0.1, and as you can see in this GIF right here, is almost instantaneous the moment you get that kill. And that means these return kills will not be happening as much as it did before. And of course, we'll see whether or not that actually becomes a thing when we start playing the game a lot more. I'm pretty sure we'll still see it because that delay does mean something. But in the end, lessening the delay means a little bit more time to be active when it comes down to it right after a fight. Continuing down to the list here, removal of shuriken and throw max ammo limits. They're just removing the ammo. That's basically it. And then a couple more item changes down at the bottom. I'll talk about that later. Action cancel and the action queue. Now you won't be able to completely cancel your action by accidentally moving too quickly, especially when you're crafting something. Your character will try to finish the crafting first and then start moving as soon as you're able to do that. So you can technically kind of cue your movements after you start crafting here, which is going to be pretty nice because we've had a lot of people struggling due to this, and I myself am a victim of this as well. So I like the change here. I'm just a little bit worried on whether or not it'll be implemented correctly, because this is that kind of thing where Nimble Neuron messed up before and it made the game very difficult to play for maybe a day or two before they fixed it. I hope it works the moment the maintenance itself finishes, because if this does not work the way that it's intended to, then the gameplay itself is going to suffer a lot while they try to find fixes for this. Next up is going to be the Fog of War adjustments. We talked about this already as well, just a little bit more of a streamlined vision of the Fog of War, just making it a lot more clear for our players. And then next up is going to be the improvements to MMR and ranking system. So continuously evolving the way that the MMR and the ranking system works is going to be Nimble Neuron. And the big thing here that we are going to have to take is the fact that enemies MMR is not going to be the main source of your MMR gain and loss anymore. It's the match lobby average that's going to be considered instead. And if you want to take a look at what the match average is going to be like, you can go to a website called DAC or, p.gg, whichever one you want to go to. You can even go to Aya, whichever one you want to go to. And the information of the match average for the lobby, for the rank, will be on the match descriptions there as well. Of course, we don't have the live versions, but you can kind of figure it out looking at the players that are in the lobby, so cool thing there. Another thing is that deaths in the battle zones where no other players gained a correlated kill will just go to the winner of the specific battle zone. So for example, if you tried to run away from the battle zone and you head popped and no one actually got the kill credit, then the person who won that battle zone will be the one to pick it up. I guess another big thing that we do have to take a look at is that they're planning on adding a new tier to separate the high concentration and Titan. I guess we'll get something like Grand Titan or something. I have no idea what they're going to be doing with that, but a cool thing that we can look forward to regardless when it comes down to it. Some improvements for beginners. I don't know if this is something that we really have to worry about right now, so I'm going to skip it a little bit here. New player thing, again, something for the new players there as well. Just a little bit of UI updates. We did see this in the dev stream, so I'll skip out on a little bit here too. But I guess one thing that we do have to recognize is the fact that when you're trying to res, you will be able to see where everybody is along the map. I should have covered this earlier, but when you're trying to resurrect, I think it's either in team modes or with the battle zone system, you can see how many players are alive in each zone, just like this, as you would normally see before the game itself starts. So cool thing that you can take a look at there as well. Other improvements, resting a lot more smoother. Epic supply boxes a lot more useful there as well. And surveillance cameras have been removed at the start of the game, which means your inventory does not have to be completely stocked up with surveillance cameras, especially at the start. Now then, the real only source of surveillance cameras are going to be bats, or of course Amazon priming those cameras in are going to be your only options to getting those surveillance cameras. Next up, the 0.75 update preview. Just a couple of things that we could take a look at. Just more things that they said they were going to do during the dev stream. They're going to start adding there here instead. And for the patch change thought and process / directions. So they wanted to adjust the different power curves by changing the game flow and the tempo itself, rather than tweaking each and every character. Of course, it's preseason. That's pretty much what they're expected to do when it comes to these big style of game mechanic changes compared to just individual character changes there. But we still do have a lot of character changes, so I still have to cover that. We're only about halfway through the patch notes. Of course, I'm not going to be covering the Cobalt ones, but there's not too many to begin with right now, so we'll see how that goes. Epic equipment overall getting stronger, legendary equipment overall getting weaker. We did talk about this during the death stream video as well. Tonfa and Tonfa weapon skill, etc, etc, etc. Something about those. The defense and armor pen stats going to be completely changed. That'll be a lot more clear when we start talking about these characters and item changes as well. We're only increasing the early SP regen to make sure characters don't struggle, yada yada yada. And equipment recipes easier. Now, this part, I don't know. You be the judge of this one. I've had a lot of people saying that it's gotten way harder, even though, quote unquote, recipes should be easier because now you don't have to craft up into something and then craft it up into the next tier of your items. Now you don't have to craft anything, just grab something and then immediately craft it. But some of these items that you do use to make equipments are completely different than what you normally got, and I'll add an example of this later down the road, so you be the judge of whether or not it is actually easier or not. Next up, changes to augments. Nerf to Havoc. Buff to Red Sprite, I would think for the most part, especially towards late game, and a nerf, a buff to Vampiric Bloodline right over there. Bitter Retribution will also be getting a pretty big buff here. The only character, if I remember correctly, that was making use of this as a meta strat was someone like Ekion. So they're going to be buffing it a little bit here to see if other people will try to use it, which in my opinion, I don't think they still will. But we'll see how that goes. Amplification Drone getting buffed here. Penny Pincher also getting buffed. Instead of 10 credits, then 5. It's always going to be 10 credits, which no matter what purchase you go for, so a lot more generic throughout the game. Run it back changes, I don't really care about this one, so we'll skip this one. I'm sorry, Run it back. Only KR uses you, and even then, people opt to not use it here instead. Changes to Mastery, they said they were going to be doing that. And character price changes, but we can talk about this at another time, or it's a little bit more obvious, or you don't have to worry it at all. All character stats have been adjusted. This is something about the TTK now that we're changing a lot more of the items, especially with the epic items becoming a lot better, while the legendary ones become a lot more worse, to kind of balance out the differences between the two. But because of that, all characters will have their stats adjusted as accordingly right here. Base HP increased by 30, HP per level increase, base defense increase, SP regen per level, and for characters who don't really use that, SP regen early on, well, I mean, Li Dailin, Cecilia, well, Cecilia does use it, Ekion uses quite a bit, Bianca uses health, but they're going to make sure that all the characters have ample amount of SP regen to make sure that early on crafting shouldn't really be that big of a problem when it comes down to it, just because your SP is lacking thanks to the amount that you're crafting at the time. Continuing on, let's start taking a look at what the actual individual character changes are going to be. Nadine, armor penetration changing over into skill amp for the crossbow, and as we said earlier, they're going to be changing the amount of stacks that you get from animals because they are going to be spawning a lot more faster starting from now on. Shukai will also get some additional Juggernaut Chef stacks when you're crafting legendary food, although I don't know if this is actually going to be something that allows Shukais to stack over 150. From the looks of it right now, I don't think so, which means this probably doesn't really come into effect for the most part. It's just a quality of life thing that Nimble Neuron is adding for Shukai, which is a good thing. If they allow him to overstack, then that's amazing for Shukai. If it's not, then it won't matter too much in the end. Aya, armor penetration for her assault rifle will change to skill amp instead. Same thing for Isol here as well. Tonfa, Alex, defense changing over into basic attack amp, and Yan as well on the Tonfa, changing to basic attack amp here instead. Ekion, I think, got the worst Out of all of these guys, armor penetration for VF prosthetic changing over into attack power, and just as like a little heads up for later as you guys as well, Aya and Isol for these armor penetration for assault rifle being lost on the mastery, they'll at least get it back on their weapons. I think Hayes is also one of those characters as well, but Ekion did not receive it on his VF prosthetics at all. So a big hit over onto Ekion's side, unless now I guess you're just trying to overstack on the attack power and you still have other items like the Diadem, as well as the Sheath of Shah Jahan, armor penetration if you're really deciding to lock on that instead. Yuki, another buff, I guess, in a way, if you really want to think about it. Defense taken is reduced by 20% instead of defense increase there. Carla, I, I didn't even know she had defense stats for crossbow, but going to be changing to basic attack amp, which doesn't really do anything. In my opinion, her basic attack on her Q isn't really something that you're going to be making use of, and I guess if you want to try building Crit Carla, I guess you can try doing that now with this. We'll see if that actually becomes a thing down the road. I don't know about that one. Fura getting a pretty big buff on her skill amp per spear mastery level over there. And Hayes, same thing as Isol as well as Aya. Changing here, instead of skill amp, she'll be getting basic attack amp because she already had skill amp scaling on her weapon. And Hyunwoo on the Tonfa will be getting basic attack amp here instead as well. But that is going to be all the character changes coming out in Preseason 8, and that's in line with what Nimble Neuron said earlier during the patch thoughts and all that stuff, where they want to change the game by changing the game flow and the tempo instead of changing each individual characters here for the preseason. So all these changes for the characters, pretty much in line with what they wanted to say, and the little amount of changes, I actually prefer this because then it allows us to experiment a lot more with the game itself, especially with the battle zone system coming in. So we'll figure that out when it comes as well. Okay, continuing down the list here, we do have pistol, of course, assault rifle, for not assault rifles, but the weapons, I should say first. The weapon section, let's take a look at this here. Pistol, gonna be just a couple of easier ways to build these items. Again, you be the judge of whether or not it's actually easier to build some of these items. But Glock changing from EMP drone to the Feather Duster, Molten Malachite, the Ringer to Double Revolver SP. I will try to skip the boring parts here since there's a lot of these kind of changes. So if you want to take a look at the specific weapon that you're looking for, of course, again, I'll include the link to this patch note down in the comments below so you can take a look at it for yourself. But some of the other changes here, Devil's Marksman getting a little bit of a nerf on the skill amp, as well as Kelty getting a nerf on the attack power. For gloves, One Inch Punch has been pretty popular recently and is going to be receiving a pretty big hit here. 3% Omni-Siphon nerfed. Attack power on Mark of the Phoenix buffed. But basic attack amplification per level will be nerfed. Imperial Silk Glove will also get a little bit of an ingredient change, but in return, we'll be receiving a little bit of a hit to its attack power here instead. And for Permafrost, just a flat skill amplification nerf here for that weapon here in 0.74. For the guitars, a nerf across the board. Wonderful Tonight going to be receiving a nerf, and unfortunately, Captain Pepper also will be receiving a nerf here as well. Now, this is a category that I think is going to be pretty huge in Season 8, not just because of the fact that we're seeing a lot of changes here, but just the fact that I think daggers are receiving a lot of utility in and of itself is going to be a little bit difficult, I think, to manage. So let's talk about Vibroblade here. They're going to be adding Vigor onto this weapon here instead, although they're going to be nerfing the base stats on this. Vigor has been really, really big for a lot of characters. Very accessible nowadays as well for most of the characters across the board because of the sheer amount of items that they're actually adding Vigor to. Vibroblade will be one of those weapons. Karn also going to be changed here. It's going to be receiving Magnetic Midnight. And this is something very similar to the Aurora Longsword, where when you attack somebody, they will get slowed for a second or so. And the cooldown is going to be 6 seconds here. So allows people who are running Karn to stick on to characters a lot better as an overall. And of course, as you can see here as well, it's going to be changing the way that you build it. And without the Saints Relic, maybe the cost of this doesn't mean that just because you're running Karn, you don't have to go Chapel anymore. So a little bit of a less reliance on Chapel for people who do want to build Karn Renin, no matter what character it is. Eclipse getting a little bit of a nerf here for itself, but for Fragarak, this weapon has been changed to a mithril item for quite a while, but they still gave it focused impact, but they are finally now changing it here. They're going to give a massive amount of attack speed buff to Fragarak, and also give Swift Strides on the side of it here as well. So, despite looking at this movement speed nerf here, it doesn't matter because Swift Strides pretty much makes up for it. So Fragarak, going to be huge, I think, in my opinion, in Season 8. Jackies are going to be a big problem if they start running Fragarak. We'll have to see when the season actually starts. For axes, just nerfs across the board here for Paradise Lost as well as Axe of Pongu. Assault rifles, as I mentioned earlier, all the assault rifles will be getting armor penetration in exchange for their main characters running it, not having armor penetration scaling for their weapons. Then that's just consistent across the board. Judgment also getting more of it and a bit of a buff here in and of itself, and Black Widow also doing the exact same thing here as well, despite getting a little bit of a skill lamp nerf for itself. Rapier, Sword of Justice, going to be a little bit more useful and easier to build because it's going to go from Covert Agent uniform to a Humbook for its recipe. Missile Team getting nerfed, Claymore Meteor getting nerfed, Meteor Claymore getting nerfed, and Joyous also getting nerfed. Hammer also nerfs just across the board in general. Bat will also be nerfs mostly across the board, although Vajra finally losing its forced impact will now be a crit bat here instead. For crossbow, so Nadine's as well as Carla's going to be getting a little bit more of that armor penetration just in their weapons alone across the board here as well. And for dual swords, just nerfs across the board for these weapon types as well. Nunchaku will also be getting nerfs across the board, but all these nerfs to weapons are pretty much consistent with what Nimble Neuron has said, in which, of course, like TTK being adjusted and all that stuff, thanks to the changes to epic items versus the legendary items. It's not too surprising here across the board. A lot of these items that are getting nerfed when it comes to the base stats are the transition ones, like Crimson Red Lovers, transition. Cerberus, a transition. Hydra, also a transition, so nothing too surprising. For the Arcanas, pretty much nerfs and buffs across the board, well, that makes sense. The Star, going to be getting a big buff here with the cooldown reduction increase. And Hierophant will more so than just becoming that flat tanky item that people used to run, especially on Johan. They're going to be changing it here into a bit more of an offensive version where you're going to have cooldown reduction as well as healing reduction from the skills instead of the reflection that a lot of Johans used to run, thanks to just trying to rat for a while here. The Moon getting a massive hit here. 14 total skill amp getting nerfed. Hopefully that wasn't a typo and that actually is a thing. And the Empress also getting a little bit of a hit here in and of itself too. Now, this is the category that I personally wanted to talk about when I was looking through the patch notes last night while I was reading it. Shurikens has gotten massive changes across the board. Now, Wind and Fire Wheels has been a weapon that hasn't been used by almost any Shuriken characters for a very, very long time now. People try to make use of it, but there are just so many other good Shurikens out there right now for AMP that nobody bothered to build the Wind and Fire Wheels. But with patch 0.74, they're going to be adding an accessibility to Biotic Infusion here instead of just having it as a stat increasing item. So, I guess we'll see how that goes. And now it's also made with rubber instead of the bamboo, so a little bit more in line with, I guess, those like amplification routes. Although we'll have to see how that goes. A lot of locations where you do have to go for like gold that is pretty important in amplification does have bamboo. Like I'm thinking of Pond right now has it. Gemstone accessibility in Temple has it. I know Forest has it as well, so I don't know if changing it to rubber is really going to be a big deal here, but of course with Biotic Infusion, something needs to come along in line. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, something has to change here instead of just the effects of the item being changed here in and of itself. And another big thing here that I wanted to take a look at, Pedal Torrent. Now, I was browsing through Twitter last night after I took a look at the patch notes. Penna, the number one Chloe player in KR, posted a screenshot of this weapon and said, hey, doesn't this look pretty good? Yes, I think so it does as well. The new unique passive, if you land 4 consecutive hits on an enemy test subject, they will receive an additional amount of skill damage. And if you would look at that, 200 plus level times 15. That is a lot. That is a lot. Now, the cooldown of it is going to be 15 seconds, but that is a ton of extra damage coming in. You're not going to be able to expect it a lot of times because you are not going to try to manage how many auto attacks that Chloe is going to be doing to you during some of those fights, or maybe even other amplification characters that are running shurikens as well. You're not going to be keeping track of it. So in full bloom, going to be pretty huge for Petal Torrent. Of course, still very difficult to make because it does include a Frost Venom Dart to begin with, which costs a Glacial Ice if I remember correctly. But still a pretty decent item Petal Torrent has become, in my opinion. Some nerfs across the board here for the remainder of our shurikens. Of course, the transition ones for Death Rune as well as Sudarsana. Dainsleaf will also be getting a nerf. Levitine also transitions. Of course, Aurora Longsword transition. Almas also a transition. Intervention will also get a recipe change. Deadly Ray going to be getting a bit of a buff and a nerf. I don't know what this attack speed here is for because Deadly Ray is an amplification item. You're not really shooting autos with it, but I guess okay. And Blackfire Cannon also receiving a little bit of a nerf in and of itself as well. Now, continuing down the list, we have spears, transition spears. Of course, all of them are going to be nerfed across the board. Except for Blazing Lance, it's going to be receiving a similar treatment to Mark of the Phoenix, where they're going to increase the base attack power, but then reduce the scaling part of it, so way late game. Of course, it's going to be a bit of a nerf, but we'll see how that goes. Whips. Cathode Lash is useless. I think. There is nobody that uses Whip right now that does anything other than amplification damage, especially with Mai getting converted into amplification style as well. So I think Cathode Lash becomes an item that literally no one is going to be using for a long time, and that's very, very unfortunate. Oranos getting a bit of a nerf, and Bloody Ninetales also getting a nerf here. Cameras! I've already gotten information from some Nathapon players that this change kind of sucks. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. VICG also going to be getting a bit of a buff here for itself. This is a big buff, I think, to Martina players for them, especially because nowadays they use VICG after they convert into the broadcast firm, so this might be something that really helps them in the long run. Ultraviolet getting nerfed, and Cannon Camera also getting nerfed. This is a change that a lot of Eternal Return players have been looking forward to. Quick Spin, the Tonfa weapon skill, will reflect less amount of damage compared to before. For the first level, going to be down to half, so 0.2 compared to 0.4%. And for level 2, 0.65 times, now it's going to be 0.3. So now you're not just going to immediately die because you time your skill wrong, or the enemy Tonfa player times their skill right. You will not just blow up your health bar by yourself. My sock will also change into a Primordial Hex, so more of a transition item up into the Obsidian Jite, while Plasma Tonfa going to be a bit more over focused on the auto attack side of things, because you are going to have Omni Siphon as well as the attack speed, although looking at it right now, you can still technically use it for amplification styles, but of course looking at this item change, so looking a bit more along the lines of something like Isaac using it more so than Hyunwoo's now using it, just because it's Plasma Tonfa and it's a lot more generic than before. Frozen Echo getting a bit nerfed, Windrunner also getting a bit nerfed, and Obsidian Jite also getting nerfed, in line with every other changes. Throw is going to be another weapon type that is going to have the charges all removed. Smokescreen going to be a bit nerfed here across the board. Grenade, of course, just kind of small changes across the board here as well. Like, for example, here too for Sling, Autograph Baseball to the Iron Ball. I don't know, is that a big deal? If it isn't, then cool. If it is, then sure, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. I don't really play that many throw characters to begin with. David Sling going to be a bit more focused on the auto attack speed as well as the basic attack amplification. So bringing it back to what we usually used to know David Sling as back in the days before they started removing the stat off of every single item. Ruthenium Marble getting a bit buffed. Smoke Bomb will now have Vigor on top of it instead of just attack speed, which I tweeted this out too. Can we stop adding Vigor to all these ranged weapons? Because it is very difficult to deal with as melee characters, because all you do is just throw your autos as ranged characters, and what are we going to do? Grenade of Antioch getting nerfed. Astrape also getting a little bit nerfed here. Pretty overused nowadays. One of the very few base weapons left in this game that has additional attack range added into it. Sticky Bomb will get a little bit of a nerf here. And Fireball also getting Magnetic Midnight. Something similar to, I believe it was Karn-Wenin, where you are going to have the slow after you auto-attack them for a second, and the cooldown going to be 5. And Dyadic Prism, going to be getting Vigor. So huge changes to both Shuriken as well as Throw in Preseason 8. And I hope this becomes a lot more balanced, since looking at these right now, Throw and Shuriken characters are going to have the time of their lives, at least in Preseason while these things exist. And even if they aren't that big of an issue, I just don't like the foundations of Nimble Neuron setting that ranged characters can have this easy of access to Vigor, because it's so difficult to deal with when ranged characters are just auto-attacking you down, and of course they still have their skills to deal with you as well. We'll figure out how that goes when it comes down to it. Bows are also going to get a bit of changes as well, but again, also in line with pretty much everything else. Ancient Bolt is the only thing that is pretty much in line to check, but they're just changing the attack speed from the Vigor stat to the base weapon instead, so not that big of a deal over there. Now, going down into the armor pieces, pretty much standard changes. I'm just going to try to look for something that is pretty important, as in like a big change. I'm not really seeing anything here over on the armor pieces at all. I guess just a bit of a buff over onto the flame barriers for Blazing Dress as well as Phantom Jacket. That's pretty big. For heads, I don't really see anything. Racing Helmet damage nerfed, and then Biotic Infusion on the Legion Halo buffed, which is kind of surprising, right? We haven't seen a buff to a Legion Halo in a very long time, but I think Nimble Neuron has done a great job in trying to balance out a Legion Halo compared to a lot of other transitions, since not every basic attack characters are forced to build this item anymore, since there are so many other options that you can go for. Tactical Visor also getting a little bit of a buff there as well. Arms, Vital Sign Sensor, this is a pretty big one. Vital Sign Sensor is basically going to be the radar, and radar is going to be the transition from Vital Sign Sensor in Preseason 8 instead of the way that it was before. So now, people who used to build radar and was looking for a transition to build up into doesn't have to only look for something like Blood Ripper just as an alternative for the attack speed now. They will have Vital Sign Sensor acting as the old radar, and then they'll have the new radar being the transition for the old radar here instead. And I'll talk about this, of course, as we go down here a little bit, although you can get a little bit of a sneak peek down at the bottom below. Buff over onto Creative Knights on the offensive side. Nightingale getting a bit of a buff over onto the damage. Dropnir getting a bit of a buff. And right here, radar with the Vital Sign, now you're going to be able to craft it up with the Tree of Life to gain additional stats compared to the regular Vital Sign sensor. Sword Stopper buff, Smart Band, yada yada yada, yada yada yada, yada yada yada. A bit of a buff over onto Cenobeat's Pauldron, dun 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 dun. Mithril Shield nerf, Shield of Kings nerf, across the board nerfs, of course. Cube Watch going to be a bit easier to build, and everything else just pretty much in line. Although this here makes a lot more sense. Now, I talked about this. Compared to Sheath of Shah Jahan, Blood Ripper didn't feel like that big of a deal, but now with this 12% armor penetration compared to the 10%, now you have 3% additional armor penetration compared to its predecessor of the Sheath of Shah Jahan. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know how that's going to work out. More mobility across the board with shoes, and then some really big buffs that are going to come through. Feather Boots, attack speed getting buffed. Maverick's Runner will also get its tenacity increased here, so closing the gap between itself as well as the Hermes Boots. Bucephalus getting a slight buff to the attack for the crit rate. White Rhinos getting a massive buff here, 7% attack speed. So maybe now White Rhinos won't be trashed on for having absolutely terrible stats outside of just the healing reduction. Tachyon's also getting a bit of a buff, and yada yada yada. Most of the transition boots also getting a bit of a nerf in line with everything else. Taproot's also getting a pretty decent nerf there as well. Hermes not going to be receiving any buffs or nerfs to the tenacity, so definitely just a closing gap compared to the epics versus the legendaries. Now the accessories part is a little bit something that I wanted to talk about as well. Aether Fringe getting a huge buff here, 2% in the crit rate as well as 2% in the cooldown reduction. Now while it doesn't look like much just on the number side, I think these buffs are pretty huge when it comes down to it, because a lot of characters who used Aether Fringe are relying on those very small stats to optimize on a lot of the small amounts of extra damage that they can kind of squeak out. And 2% cooldown reduction is nothing that people are going to be complaining over, so a huge buff to Aether Fringe users. A big change to Hawkeye. Very, very easy way for characters to get smooth walkers. So like Dai Lins are going to be suffering a little bit from this here as well, where they're going to be changing it here. Instead of an attack power solely focused item, they're also going to be adding a little bit of a skill amp and making it Biotic Infusion here instead. So a weaker version of the older Kundala is essentially what they're trying to go for here with the Hawkeye. And then with Kundala itself, they actually also changed it, where it's a lot easier to craft now. Now you don't need 2 different transition items; you only need 1. But of course, in line with the changes to this, a big nerf to the way that Kundala is going to work. Pretty much more than half of its skill amp cut off, and instead of Biotic Infusion, they'll give it Armor Penetration and Primordial Hex here instead. Something pretty much similar, I feel like, for Kundala Mark II, although Kundala Mark II already has a separate active in team mode, so that's not really that big of a deal. And for Sanguine Goombay, a nerf over there, and Eye of Horus, a nerf over there too. A ton of food changes, but this is, again, I mentioned earlier, since it's not affected by healing reduction anymore, it's just much more of a generic change that they're going to be doing overall. Nothing too surprising, nothing too surprising, nothing too surprising, nothing too surprising. Traps and other items, Ion Battery just changing its rarity, and now I'm surprised about this one. They're saying that the locations of the transfer console and the security console have changed inside the chapel. Where? They have not included a picture with this, so I have absolutely no clue where it is actually going to be. Is it going to be inside the chapel? I guess. I have no clue. I have absolutely no clue. Just a little bit of mode balancing. There's nothing too big here, of course, since it's just going to be preseason. They're not really focusing on this. And then the rest of the changes are going to be Cobalt changes. Okay. So, how long have I been recording here? Just about an hour. Okay, this is going to be a long video. Holy crap. Okay. First of all, if you have stuck all the way through the end, I know I had some small things that I'm going to be editing out in between here as well, and some things I'm going to be editing in. If you were here with me until the end of the video, first of all, thank you very much. This was a very long video. I think this is pretty much in line with the fact that it is going to be a preseason, and there's a lot of things to cover in this patch notes to begin with. But other than that, my thoughts about this patch. I didn't see too many things being changed for escaping, although I've heard in the KR side of things, they're actually kind of liking the escapes, because there's been a lot of like niche things that you can do with escaping and LP gain overall, so overall over in that region, I don't think anyone's complaining about the escape system, at least when it comes to the fundamental mechanics behind it. They're going to be making it, of course, a lot easier in 0.75, as we saw earlier over there as well. Battle Zone is something that I'm a little bit worried about right now. Not just because the battlefield system itself is a new thing that's being added. I think the bigger problem that I have is how strong the mythic items are going to be. Just looking at numbers right now, they're very, very strong. So a little bit worried on that front. As long as they can balance that, I don't think it should be too big of an issue. And overall, Season 8 is going to be a season where we're going to be changing the flow of the game overall as a whole and trying to make it so that people on completely opposite sides of the spectrum of strength after a certain point of the game still have options where they'll still be able to walk away with like a successful game in their thoughts since they managed to survive that long, whether it be through the battle zone succession and just continuously snowballing off of it, or you have that escape option and still managing to secure yourself some LP through there. So Season 8, going to be pretty exciting. There's a lot of changes that we're going to have to keep track of. Of course, we have 2 weeks of preseason, which I don't think is going to be nearly enough to test anything that is coming in this preseason. But we'll see how Season 8 goes. And of course, for me, I will see you guys in other videos. And other than that, let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought about this video. And in general as a whole, what you guys think about Season 8. Now, I'm not going to keep you guys here any longer, so I'll see you guys in the next video. And have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys later.